Even though community association living is challenging by nature, you don't have to feel alone. We're fortunate today in our Advanced Reserve Concepts webinar to have a guest expert from the Association Reserves team, Ms. Coley Grev. With a background as a manager and as a reserve specialist, Coley helps associations avoid common mistakes, clarify their goals, and master the rules of the game. So, what should you do if you discover your reserves are significantly underfunded? How do you know how often to update your reserve study? Coley covers all this and more. Enjoy her words of wisdom.
Thank you, Robert, and hello. I'm really glad to be here with you all today. I want to follow up on those industry best practices with a few thoughts from my experience as a manager and a reserve specialist about what problems of your own making you can avoid. First, don't make statements you can't support. When it comes to the reserve study, it's much better to say, well, let's look at the latest reserve study and see what it says, rather than say, oh, the reserves are great, or it's no problem to let that slide another year or two. Rely on your experts. People can and will misinterpret your well-intended comments. Always go to the source, the reserve study or your reserve study preparer. Secondly, dated information is not very helpful. Think of your reserve study like you do a banana or an avocado. They are perishable. Update your reserve study and get fresh information. Everything from 3 years ago is so out of date, it's missed the whole last 2 years of inflation. And boy, have we seen that this time more than anything. Thirdly, delaying projects. While it may feel like not spending the money saves money, remember that in most cases, doing the project on time is a good idea. Cost overruns that are common when you wait too long happen. Things of the high cost, like a roof leak caused by delayed replacement of the roofs or having to replace deteriorated fencing or siding instead of just repainting it, makes these costs go up. The board's job is to maintain the common areas, not let things slide into disrepair. Everything is expensive, but the cost of home ownership is part of paying all of these costs. Be careful. Don't spend reserve funds on non-reserve projects. Make sure anything you spend on reserves is either listed as a component or has been cleared by your reserve study preparer. It may seem like no big deal, but a few $100 or $1,000 here or there really adds up and prevents you from having enough money to get your true reserve projects done. Reserves are not a miscellaneous savings fund for whatever you want to accomplish. Reserves were collected specifically for reserve projects. If your association is in a cash flow crisis and needs to borrow from reserves, commit to restoring that cash to the reserve fund and raise your assessment so the operating fund can stand on its own. We want to make sure that small items like a plumbing bill or plant replacement are not being just taken from reserves because there happened to be a leak or the board members would like to put new plants in. If you have a plant renovation line item in your reserve study, then great. If you have a pipe replacement in your reserve study that's for smaller areas, then great. But generally those items just draw your reserves down artificially and you're not planning for those drawdowns. The same is true for the income side. Make sure you've set your budget so you're able to make your scheduled reserve transfers. In these times, that likely means raising your monthly assessment. The roof deterioration bill and the asphalt deterioration bill are all real and need to be paid just like the power bill, management bill, and your insurance premium. And finally, don't be casual about your reserve investments. Be careful. Maximize your investment and returns. There's a lot that we can do instead of just having them sit in a savings account, maybe laddering your CDs or talking with an investment banker. See a reserve investment specialist and watch our investment and inflation webinar recording. Now, let's keep an eye on the big picture. What are we trying to accomplish with reserves? What is your goal? Is it having enough funds on hand to do your scheduled projects in a timely manner when they need to be done? Robert talked about not spending reserves carelessly, and this is what it's all about. And the next point, how do you win at reserves? Just like most games, the score is based on numbers. You have a plan that's based on income and expenses. You need to keep that income coming in, balancing the expenses going out. And there are actually two sets of rules that affect reserve studies and reserve fund management. The first set of rules is pretty straightforward, what we call the 4 reserve rules. It's really just a statement of the fact that expenses like will always happen. There's no avoiding them. The board is responsible to manage the assets of the association. Like I mentioned a moment ago, delays often get expensive. So don't delay and get stuck with the projects that go away over the budget. And finally, the owners always get stuck paying the bills. Whether the board saves the owners money or makes things more expensive, the owners always get stuck paying the bills. The other set of rules is called the business judgment rule. When a board's decisions are challenged, whatever they've done is checked against the 3-part business judgment rule. So with all the decisions you make, large and small, you want to make sure you're operating according to the business judgment rule. What's interesting is that in hindsight, you can be flat out wrong. But if you can show that you followed these 3 steps of the business judgment rule, you'll have a strong defense. So make sure everything you can do is described as being in good faith, meaning you were loyal and responsible to the needs of the association. You operated in their best interest, meaning you didn't do anything self-serving or wasteful, and you were careful and responsible with the association's money and with the vendors and suppliers you hired. Number 3 is that you acted prudently, meaning that you weren't sure what to do, you didn't guess. You just reached out for help. That could be your landscaping to find out which plans to use, your accountant, attorney, manager, insurance agent, or yes, even your reserve city provider. In other words, no guessing. Whether a manager or a board member, you are not expected to know it all. Reach out for wise counsel. And be careful about describing what you have or are striving to have as adequate reserves. Be careful because since 2018, reserve adequacy is a defined industry term. You can see more on our website, but simply it just means that your reserve plan shows that you'll have enough cash to do all your reserve projects for the next 20 years without reliance on future loans or special assessments. Think of it as a sustainable budget plan. You may often wonder how you can safely minimize your reserve transfers. You generally can't change your expenses. The roof is going to fail no matter how hard you wish it would last longer, or whether you cut the roof costs in half by wishing it in half. So work the income side. Maximize your interest earnings. Like I said a moment ago, watch our recent webinar on investment and inflation. Don't be content getting a miserably low interest rate from a savings account at a local bank. Another idea is to do your projects on time. I can't tell you how many times a client has delayed a painting or asphalt or roofing project thinking they were saving money, only to end up spending way more. I'm talking 20 to 50% more. A year or two later, because of damage caused by delay, it's an easily avoidable mistake. I recently had an association that had an asphalt project. They kept putting it off and kept putting it off. And now instead of doing an overlay to their asphalt, they now have to do sub-base repairs. Those sub-base repairs double the cost of their asphalt overlay. If they'd done regular sealing, done their regular overlay when it was time, instead of waiting until those potholes really started to develop and there was cracking everywhere, they would have saved themselves money. They thought they were saving money by pushing it down the road a few years. It really didn't save them any money. And now asphalt's 20% more than it was before. It's a bit counterintuitive, but associations with a strong reserve fund generally aren't paying more towards reserves. They're just keeping their reserve fund stable. That's because they don't have to play catch up with high reserve transfers to prepare for an upcoming expensive project. They're already on schedule to get it done and be ready to have it done. And although it's not a big expense, there are ways to save money on your reserve study itself. The first is to have the right level of service performed. If you've had a reserve study prepared according to National Reserve Study standards, you probably don't need another full reserve study. You can select between a less expensive with site visit or no site visit update study. And you can improve the quality of your reserve study and stretch the interval between updates by asking questions and making sure the reserve study is custom tuned to your association. You can do that with software like the free UPlanet online reserve calculator that we offer to our clients. Then finally, be involved in the process. When we find clients that answer our questions about what was done and when and why and by whom, it actually reduces the amount of time we spend researching things. And we can charge less for future reserve study updates. It also makes your reserve study that much more strong when we have information that is very specific to your community. Now, you signed up for advanced concepts, so here they are. First, interest and inflation are both real and important, but they don't cancel each other out. And that's because interest is earned only on reserve funds you have on deposit. but inflation causes the entire value of your components to grow. For instance, you might have $80,000 in your fund earning interest, but you might have $800,000 total value of reserve components increasing with inflation each year. I talked about the danger of delaying a project, but let me emphasize it again here. There really is very little value in delaying a project. The expense is still there. Delaying a project doesn't have a measurable effect on reducing your reserve fund obligation. We demonstrate this on other webinars. It's just not worth it. And getting all worked up or frustrated about the question of operating or reserves, it's not a big deal. A $5,000 pool heater is just as expensive to the owners, whether it's paid in operating or reserves. We cover the issue in other webinars, but the bottom line is that there is no effect on the cost to a homeowner, whether it's paid from their right pocket or their left pocket, operating or reserves. One way or another, you need to collect to fund the items so they can be spent. And by all means, think ahead and take advantage of ways to save money by doing projects together. If you need to paint your trim, paint your ironwork at the same time. If you need to seal your asphalt, perhaps paint your red curbs at the same time. And if you're replacing the furniture in your clubhouse, consider replacing the carpet, repainting the walls at the same time. If you combine projects and save the company time, it often saves your association some money. Now, a few clients have voiced some concerns that they don't want to inappropriately influence the process. They want a good reserve study and don't want to influence the outcome. No worries on that. I've done hundreds of reserve studies. I know the National Reserve Study Standards, and it's our company logo that goes on the cover. We welcome all of your suggestions and insight into what's happened and when and why. And we know when to dig in our heels and keep our independence. Nobody twists our arms. Now, let me take a moment to go over some best practices with respect to your reserve funding plan. First, it's in your best interest, and you'll have the most success communicating to homeowners if you characterize reserve funding as offsetting ongoing deterioration. It's a current bill like any other bill in the association. Nobody is paying for something 5, 10, or 20 years in the future. All you're doing is offsetting current deterioration a month at a time. If you do that, the future takes care of itself. Reserve funding is not optional. Deterioration never takes a day off. So your funding should never take a break. The funding plan we design is custom to your association, steady and smooth, just like what is recommended in the National Reserve Study Standards. Make sure you update your reserve study regularly so any funding plan adjustments are as small as possible. But if you're way behind, no worries. We'll develop a multi-year plan, like an exercise plan, that will strengthen your reserves so you are prepared. And the last topic I'll cover before Robert wraps things up is helping you understand some of the nuances of what you're getting in your reserve study. First, how far ahead we'll be looking and estimating component expenses. The answer is that at least 20 years of projected income and expenses are required by the National Reserve Study Standards. But the real answer is that we will capture all the significant, reasonably predictable projects that are in your future. So if you just put a new roof on that has a 40-year design life, we'll include that in your reserve study. There is no magic 30-year limit. And as I mentioned a few times, the importance of updating your reserve study. So what influences your decision how often to update your reserve study? First, in preparing over 70,000 reserve studies, we've learned that we only touch a client's reserve study every 5 years. It's pretty much a rescue mission. So much has changed about the component's life and costs and the reserve balance that sometimes that update is almost like a brand new reserve study. The component conditions, costs, and reserve fund balance has little resemblance to our previous plan. And for those associations who hire us every third year, we generally characterize those reserve studies as adjustments. Finally, another category are those clients that hire us every year. In almost all of those cases, the results are just minor tweaks. Their reserve funding plan just plain never gets off track because they're paying attention to it on a very regular basis. In addition to my impressions, let me give you some numbers. The associations that hire us every 3 years instead of every 5 have 8.3% fewer special assessments than the 5-year group. And that's simply because they've got 2 fewer years of drifting off their original plan. And finally, associations that update their reserve study annually have 35% fewer special assessments than the once every 5 years group. Again, that's just because they are regularly adjusting their plan, never drifting off of it.
At Association Reserves, we make the present less stressful and the future more secure. If you want to join us in this mission, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see us address in a future video. Let's plan for your best future.